The morning fog hung thick over London as Officer James Mitchell adjusted his radio and checked his watch. It was 6:45 a.m., and the streets around Buckingham Palace were unusually quiet for a Tuesday. James had been with the Metropolitan Police for 12 years, and his K9 partner, Rex, a German shepherd with keen eyes and an impeccable service record, sat alertly beside him in their patrol car. Rex was more than just a working dog to James. The 4-year-old shepherd had been his partner for 3 years, and together they had solved countless cases, from drug busts to finding missing persons. Rex's intelligence and loyalty were legendary among the force. The dog could detect explosives, track suspects across miles of terrain, and had never once failed to protect his handler when danger arose. That morning, a call came through the radio that would change both their lives forever. All units, we have reports of suspicious activity near the palace gates. Possible security threat. Proceed with extreme caution. James felt his pulse quicken as he turned on the sirens and headed toward the royal residence. When they arrived at the scene, chaos was already unfolding. A crowd had gathered and several police cars were positioned around the area. Through the commotion, James could see a figure in the distinctive red uniform and tall black hat of a British royal guard standing at his post near the palace entrance. The guard appeared to be a young man, probably in his early 20s, standing perfectly still despite the growing tension around him. Inspector Sarah Thompson, James's superior, approached their car with a stern expression. "Mitchell, we've got a situation," she said, her voice tense. Anonymous tip came in about a potential threat. Someone called saying they saw suspicious movement from the guard position. "We need to investigate immediately." James looked toward the royal guard, who remained motionless at his post. Something felt wrong about the whole situation. The guard's posture was perfect, his discipline evident even from a distance. These were some of the most highly trained soldiers in the British military, selected for their unwavering dedication and impeccable character. "What kind of suspicious movement?" James asked, studying the scene more carefully. The caller claimed they saw the guard making unusual gestures, possibly signaling to someone. "Could be nothing. But with the current security climate, we can't take any chances," Thompson replied. "I need you and Rex to approach and conduct a security sweep." As James prepared Rex for the approach, he noticed something that made him pause. The royal guard, despite all the commotion around him, had not moved a single muscle. His eyes stared straight ahead, following the strict protocol that governed his duty. James had seen royal guards before, but this level of discipline in the face of such chaos was remarkable. Rex sensed the tension and stood ready, his training kicking in automatically. The dog's ears were perked, and his nose twitched as he analyzed the various scents in the air. James trusted Rex's instincts completely. If there was a real threat, Rex would detect it long before any human could. As they began walking toward the guard, James noticed details that others might have missed. The guard's uniform was immaculate, every button polished, every crease perfect. His hands holding his rifle were steady and properly positioned. Everything about his appearance and demeanor suggested a soldier carrying out his duties with the highest level of professionalism. The crowd of onlookers grew larger, with tourists and locals alike trying to understand what was happening. Some were taking photos and videos with their phones, turning what should have been a routine security check into a public spectacle. James felt uncomfortable with the attention but knew he had to follow orders. When they were about 20 feet away, James called out, "Sir, we need to conduct a routine security check. Please remain in position." The royal guard gave no indication that he had heard, which was exactly what James expected. These soldiers were trained not to break their concentration or acknowledge distractions while on duty. Rex's behavior began to change as they got closer. Instead of showing signs of alertness for a potential threat, the dog seemed confused. His tail, which usually remained rigid during security operations, began to wag slightly. This was unusual behavior that James had rarely seen during official duties. Inspector Thompson's voice crackled through James's radio. "Mitchell," the caller provided more details. "Claims the guard was seen making hand signals toward the eastern section of the palace grounds about 30 minutes ago. We need a thorough investigation." James studied the guard more intently. The young man's face was partially obscured by the shadow of his bearskin hat, but James could see enough to notice something troubling. There were what appeared to be tear tracks on the guard's cheeks, barely visible but definitely present. This discovery made James's heart sink. Whatever was happening here was more complex than a simple security threat. The crowd continued to grow, and James could hear murmurs and speculation from the bystanders. Some were suggesting the guard was involved in something sinister, while others defended him, pointing out his obvious dedication to duty. The situation was becoming increasingly tense, and James knew that whatever happened next would likely be recorded and shared across social media within minutes. Rex continued to show unusual behavior, sniffing the air repeatedly and looking back at James with an expression that seemed almost questioning. The dog's instincts were telling him something that didn't align with the official reason for their presence. James had learned to trust Rex's judgment implicitly over their years together. As James prepared to give Rex the command to conduct a detailed security sweep, he took one more careful look at the Royal Guard. The young soldier's breathing was controlled but slightly irregular, suggesting he was under significant emotional stress. His grip on his rifle remained proper, but James could see the slightest tremor in his hands. The morning sun began to burn through the fog, casting longer shadows across the palace grounds. The scene was set for what would become one of the most controversial and ultimately heartwarming incidents in recent London police history. James had no idea that his next decision would not only change his understanding of duty and compassion, but would also reveal a story that would touch the hearts of millions around the world. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the events that would unfold over the next several minutes would challenge everything James thought he knew about following orders, trusting instincts, and recognizing when humanity should prevail over protocol. James took a deep breath and looked down at Rex, who was now sitting calmly but alert, his intelligent brown eyes fixed on the Royal Guard. The dog's behavior was becoming more unusual by the minute. Instead of showing the typical signs of detecting a threat, Rex appeared almost protective, as if he sensed something vulnerable about the young soldier standing at attention. "Rex, search," James commanded, using the standard protocol for a security sweep. But instead of immediately moving toward the guard in an aggressive stance, Rex approached slowly, his tail held low but wagging slightly. This gentle approach was completely contrary to his training for potential threat situations. The Royal Guard, whose name tag read Williams, remained perfectly still as Rex circled him. James watched carefully, noting every detail of the interaction. The guard's eyes briefly flickered downward toward Rex, and for just a moment, James caught a glimpse of profound sadness in those young eyes before they returned to their forward stare. Inspector Thompson's voice came through the radio again, more urgent this time. "Mitchell, what's your status? We're getting pressure from higher up to resolve this quickly. The media is starting to pick up on the story." James could see news vans pulling up in the distance, their satellite dishes extended like mechanical flowers reaching toward the sky. The situation was escalating beyond a simple security check, and he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Whatever decision he made in the next few minutes would likely be scrutinized by thousands of people. Rex completed his circle around Guard Williams and sat down directly in front of him, looking up at the soldier's face. This was not standard behavior for a security dog. Rex had been trained to indicate threats by barking, pawing, or maintaining an aggressive posture. Instead, he seemed to be offering comfort, as if he could sense emotional distress rather than physical danger. James moved closer to get a better view of the situation. As he did, he noticed something that made his stomach clench with concern. There were not just tear tracks on William's face. There were fresh tears slowly rolling down his cheeks. The young guard was crying while maintaining his position, following his orders despite whatever personal crisis he was experiencing. The crowd around them had grown to nearly 100 people, with tourists and locals alike craning their necks to see what was happening. James could hear fragments of conversation from the onlookers. Some were expressing sympathy for the guard, while others were speculating about what kind of threat he might pose. The pressure of public attention was making an already difficult situation even more complicated. James decided to take a different approach. Instead of treating this as a standard security threat, he began to consider the possibility that Guard Williams was in distress rather than dangerous. The anonymous tip that had brought them here suddenly seemed questionable. Why would someone report suspicious hand signals from a guard who was clearly following protocol and showing no signs of aggressive behavior? "Williams," James said quietly, stepping close enough that only the guard could hear him. "I'm Officer Mitchell. Can you tell me if you're all right? The guard's jaw tightened slightly, but he gave no verbal response. However, James noticed that his breathing became more irregular, suggesting that the question had hit close to home. Rex seemed to pick up on this emotional change and moved even closer to the guard, gently pressing against his leg in a gesture that was pure comfort rather than investigation. Inspector Thompson approached them, her expression showing frustration and concern. "Mitchell, we need answers. The palace security team is asking questions, and I've got reporters calling the station. What exactly is happening here?" James looked at his superior and then back at the guard, who was now visibly struggling to maintain his composure while remaining at attention. "Inspector, I think we might be dealing with a different kind of situation than we originally thought." "What do you mean?" Thompson asked, her voice sharp with impatience. "I don't think this young man is a threat to anyone except possibly himself," James replied carefully. "Look at Rex's behavior. He's not indicating danger. He's offering comfort. And look at the guard's face. He's been crying." Thompson studied Guard Williams more carefully, and her expression began to soften. As a mother of 2 young soldiers herself, she recognized the signs of someone struggling with overwhelming emotions while trying to maintain military discipline. Meanwhile, Rex had positioned himself directly in front of Williams, sitting perfectly still but maintaining eye contact with the guard in a way that seemed almost human in its empathy. The dog's presence appeared to be having a calming effect on the young soldier, whose breathing was beginning to regulate slightly. James made a decision that would define the rest of this encounter. Instead of following the standard protocol for a potential security threat, he chose to trust his instincts and Rex's clear signals that this was a person in need of help, rather than someone posing a danger. "Inspector, I request permission to handle this as a welfare check rather than a security threat," James said formally. "My assessment, based on Rex's behavior and my observations, is that Guard Williams is experiencing some kind of personal crisis, but poses no danger to public safety." Thompson hesitated, weighing the risks of deviating from protocol against the growing evidence that this situation was not what it had initially appeared to be. The crowd was becoming more restless, and she could see that some people were becoming impatient with what seemed like a slow-moving investigation. "You're putting your career on the line with this assessment, Mitchell," she warned. "If you're wrong and something happens, it's on both of us." James looked down at Rex, who was now gently resting his head against William's leg, completely at ease despite being in what should have been a high-alert situation. The dog's judgment had never failed him before, and James was willing to bet everything on that trust. "I understand the risks, Inspector, but Rex is telling me this man needs help, not restraint. I'm willing to take responsibility for that assessment." The sun was now fully visible above the London skyline, casting a warm light over the scene. The contrast between the growing media attention and the quiet, gentle interaction between Rex and Guard Williams created a surreal atmosphere. James realized that whatever happened next would either validate his years of experience and trust in his partner, or potentially end his career in law enforcement. The moment of decision had arrived, and James knew that the next few minutes would determine not only the outcome of this situation, but also potentially change the lives of everyone involved. Inspector Thompson gave James a long, hard look before nodding slowly. "All right, Mitchell. We'll handle this as a welfare check, but we do it carefully and by the book. One wrong move and we'll both be explaining ourselves to the commissioner." James felt a wave of relief wash over him as he watched Rex continue his gentle vigil beside Guard Williams. The dog seemed to understand that his role had shifted from law enforcement to emotional support, and he maintained his calm, comforting presence without any additional commands. The crowd had grown even larger, and James could see several people live-streaming the encounter on their phones. The last thing he wanted was for this young soldier's personal crisis to become entertainment for social media. But there was little he could do about the public nature of the situation. James decided to try a different approach to communication. Instead of addressing Williams directly, he spoke to Rex in a tone that he knew the guard would overhear. "Easy, boy. I can see you found someone who needs a friend. Good job." For the first time since they had arrived, Williams's rigid posture shifted almost imperceptibly. His eyes, still focused straight ahead, seemed to soften slightly at the acknowledgement that Rex was offering friendship rather than conducting an investigation. A palace security officer approached the group, his crisp uniform and serious expression adding another layer of complexity to the situation. "Officer Mitchell? I'm Captain Roberts from Palace Security. We need to understand what's happening here. Guard Williams is one of our most reliable soldiers, and this situation is highly unusual." James appreciated the captain's supportive tone toward Williams. It suggested that whatever was troubling the young guard, it wasn't a matter of professional misconduct or disloyalty. "Captain, we're treating this as a welfare check. My K-9 partner's behavior indicates that Guard Williams may be experiencing some kind of personal distress." Captain Roberts studied Williams carefully, and his expression showed recognition and concern. "Williams received some difficult news this morning before his shift. His commanding officer informed me, but Williams insisted on reporting for duty as scheduled. We should have realized when we trailed off, clearly feeling some responsibility for the situation." The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place for James. A young soldier, dealing with personal trauma, trying to maintain his professional duties despite overwhelming emotional pain. It was a situation that required compassion and understanding, not law enforcement action. Rex seemed to sense that the adults were beginning to understand the situation, and he looked up at Williams with an expression that could only be described as gentle encouragement. The dog's emotional intelligence was remarkable, and James felt a surge of pride in his partner's ability to read human emotion so accurately. James made another careful decision. "Guard Williams," he said softly, "would it help if we could arrange for you to have a brief break from your post? Captain Roberts is here, and I'm sure arrangements can be made." For the first time, Williams's military discipline wavered slightly. His lower lip trembled, and he blinked rapidly as if fighting back a fresh wave of tears. However, he still maintained his position and did not speak. Inspector Thompson stepped forward, her maternal instincts clearly engaged. "Son," she said gently, "whatever you're going through, you don't have to face it alone. We're here to help, not to cause trouble." The crowd around them had begun to quiet, sensing that something important was happening. Many of the onlookers had put away their phones and were watching with genuine concern, rather than mere curiosity. The human drama unfolding before them was touching something deeper than their desire for entertainment. Captain Roberts took charge of the situation with the kind of decisive leadership that comes from years of military experience. "Williams, I'm ordering you to take a temporary break from your post. We'll have Sergeant Davis cover your position. You need to take care of yourself before you can take care of your duties." The relief that washed over Williams's face was immediately visible. His shoulders sagged slightly as the weight of trying to maintain perfect discipline while dealing with personal pain was finally lifted. He nodded once, a small but significant acknowledgement of the order. Rex seemed to understand that a breakthrough had occurred, and his tail began wagging more enthusiastically. The dog had successfully identified someone in need and had helped create the conditions for that person to receive help. James felt a profound sense of satisfaction as he watched the situation transform from a potential confrontation into an act of community support. This was what police work was supposed to be about: protecting and serving people, including protecting them from their own pain when necessary. However, the situation was far from over. Williams was still visibly struggling with whatever news he had received, and James could see that the young soldier was fighting a battle between his military training to remain stoic and his human need to process grief or trauma. "Williams," Captain Roberts said with firm kindness, "I want you to come with me. We'll get you connected with the appropriate support services. Whatever you're dealing with, the regiment has resources to help." As Williams finally began to move from his post, Rex stayed close beside him, offering continued emotional support. The dog's instinctive understanding of human need was creating a bridge between the young soldier's isolation and the help that was being offered. The crowd began to disperse somewhat. Though many people remained to see the resolution of the situation, James noticed that the expressions on most faces had shifted from curiosity to genuine concern and support for the young guard. Inspector Thompson approached James with a mixture of relief and admiration. "Good work, Mitchell. Your instincts were right, and Rex's behavior probably prevented this from becoming a much more serious situation." James patted Rex proudly, knowing that his partner's emotional intelligence had been the key to understanding what was really happening. The dog had seen past the uniform and the duty to recognize a fellow being in pain, and that recognition had made all the difference. As they prepared to escort Williams to where he could receive proper support, James realized that this encounter would stay with him for the rest of his career. It had been a powerful reminder that behind every uniform, every role, every public facade, there was a human being with private struggles and emotional needs. The morning sun was now bright and warm, and the fog had completely cleared from the palace grounds. What had begun as a potential security threat had transformed into a story of compassion, understanding, and the remarkable ability of animals to sense human emotional needs. As William stepped away from his post for the first time that morning, the full weight of his emotional burden became visible. His carefully maintained military posture crumbled, and tears began flowing freely down his face. Rex immediately moved closer, pressing against the young soldier's leg in a gesture of pure, instinctive comfort. Captain Roberts placed a supportive hand on Williams's shoulder. "Take your time, son. Whatever you're dealing with, we'll face it together." The captain's voice carried the authority of command, but also the warmth of genuine care for one of his soldiers. James watched the interaction with deep respect for how the military was handling one of their own in crisis. It reminded him that beneath all the protocol and discipline, these organizations were ultimately about people taking care of people. Williams finally found his voice, though it was shaky and barely above a whisper. "My sister. She was in an accident last night. The doctors don't know if she'll—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but everyone present understood the gravity of what he was facing. The revelation hit James like a physical blow. This young man had been standing guard, maintaining perfect discipline and following orders while his heart was breaking over his sister's condition. The strength it must have taken to remain at his post was almost incomprehensible. Rex seemed to understand the significance of Williams finally speaking, and the dog moved to sit directly in front of him, looking up with those intelligent, compassionate eyes that had first alerted James that something was wrong. Inspector Thompson's expression softened completely. As someone who had children of her own, she could imagine the agony of being separated from a family member during a medical crisis. "Son, why didn't you request emergency leave? No one expects you to stand guard when your family needs you." Williams wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, struggling to regain some composure. "She's all I have left. Our parents died 2 years ago, and it's just been us. When I got the call this morning, I didn't know what to do. My training says duty first, but my heart—" He gestured helplessly. The crowd around them had grown quieter, and James could see that many people were visibly moved by Williams' story. What had started as curiosity about a police investigation had transformed into a community witnessing a young man's courage and vulnerability. Captain Roberts was already reaching for his radio. "I'm arranging immediate compassionate leave and transportation to the hospital. Williams, you should have come to me the moment you received that call." "I thought I could handle it, sir. I thought if I just focused on my duty, I could get through the day and then deal with it after my shift," Williams replied, his voice gaining a bit more strength. James understood that kind of thinking. He had seen it countless times in his police work. People trying to maintain normalcy and routine when their world was falling apart, as if performing their duties could somehow hold back the chaos of personal crisis. Rex had positioned himself so that Williams could rest his hand on the dog's head, and James noticed that the physical contact seemed to be helping the young soldier find some emotional equilibrium. The healing power of human-animal connection was something James had witnessed many times, but it never failed to amaze him. "Officer Mitchell," Williams said, looking at James for the first time since the encounter began, "I want to apologize. I know you were just doing your job, and I probably caused a lot of unnecessary worry." James shook his head firmly. "You have nothing to apologize for. You were doing your job under impossible circumstances. If anything, your dedication is remarkable, even if it was misguided in this case." Inspector Thompson stepped forward. "Williams, I want you to know that the Metropolitan Police will provide whatever assistance we can. If you need help with transportation, communication with the hospital, or anything else, just ask." The offer of support from law enforcement clearly touched Williams, and fresh tears began to flow. "Thank you. All of you. I didn't expect—" "This is what community looks like," James said simply. "People helping people when they need it most." Captain Roberts had finished making his arrangements and returned to the group. "Transport is on the way to take you to the hospital. I've also arranged for Chaplain Morris to meet you there if you'd like spiritual support. Your leave is approved for as long as you need." Williams nodded gratefully, then looked down at Rex, who was still maintaining his protective vigil. "Your dog. He knew somehow, didn't he? He knew I wasn't a threat. He knew I just needed help." James smiled and patted Rex proudly. Rex has an incredible ability to read people. He saw through the uniform to the person underneath who was in pain. That's what made me realize we were dealing with someone who needed support, not suspicion. The arrival of an official vehicle marked the beginning of Williams's journey to be with his sister. As he prepared to leave, he knelt down to Rex's level and gently scratched behind the dog's ears. "Thank you, boy," he whispered. "I don't know how you knew, but you probably saved my life today. I was starting to think I couldn't hold it together much longer." Rex's tail wagged gently, and he gave Williams's hand a soft lick, as if offering a final gesture of encouragement before their parting. James realized that this encounter had taught him something profound about the nature of service and duty. Williams had been trying to serve his country while his heart was breaking. But true service sometimes meant recognizing when to ask for help and when to accept the support of others. As Williams stood to leave, many people in the crowd began to applaud quietly. It wasn't the kind of applause given for entertainment, but rather the respectful acknowledgement of a young man's courage and the community's support for him during his crisis. Inspector Thompson watched the scene with satisfaction. "This is why we do this job, Mitchell. Not for the arrests or the headlines, but for moments like this when we can actually help someone." James nodded, feeling a deep sense of purpose and gratitude for his career choice. The morning had started with what seemed like a routine call, but it had become a powerful reminder of why police work at its best was about protecting and serving the human community. Rex sat calmly beside James, his work done for the moment, but his alertness still evident. The dog had demonstrated something remarkable about the ability to see beyond appearances to recognize genuine human need, and his example had guided everyone toward the right response. As Williams' transport pulled away, James felt confident that they had all played a part in ensuring that a young soldier would be where he needed to be, beside his sister during her medical crisis, surrounded by the support of his military family and the broader community that had witnessed his courage. 3 days later, James was sitting in his office completing paperwork when Inspector Thompson approached his desk with an unusual expression on her face. She was holding a tablet computer and seemed both surprised and pleased about something. "Mitchell, you need to see this," she said, setting the tablet down in front of him. "The Williams situation has taken an interesting turn." James looked at the screen and saw a news article with the headline, "Royal Guard's Crisis Leads to Outpouring of Community Support." Below it was a photo of Rex sitting beside Williams, taken by one of the bystanders during their encounter at the palace. "The story went viral," Thompson explained. "Someone filmed the whole thing and posted it online. But instead of it becoming a negative story about security concerns, people are focusing on how everyone came together to help Williams." James scrolled through the article, reading about how the incident had sparked conversations about mental health support for military personnel and the importance of community response to people in crisis. There were hundreds of comments from people praising Rex's intuitive response and the compassionate handling of the situation by all involved. "There's more," Thompson continued, pulling up another tab on the screen. "The hospital where William's sister is being treated has been flooded with flowers, cards, and donations from people who saw the story. The hashtag #TheHiredSupportGuardWilliams is trending on social media." James felt a mix of emotions reading about the public response. On one hand, he was glad that people were focusing on the positive aspects of the story, rather than treating it as entertainment. On the other hand, he worried about Williams's privacy during what was already an incredibly difficult time. Rex, who had been sleeping peacefully beside James's desk, seemed to sense the shift in his partner's emotional state and opened his eyes. The dog had returned to his normal routine, but James noticed that he seemed more attentive to people's emotional states since the incident with Williams. "Has there been any word about Williams's sister?" James asked, his primary concern being for the young soldier and his family situation. Thompson smiled for the first time since approaching his desk. "That's actually the best part. I spoke with Captain Roberts this morning. Williams's sister is going to be okay. She's awake and the doctors expect her to make a full recovery. Williams has been by her side since he left the palace." Relief flooded through James as he heard the news. The image of Williams struggling to maintain his composure while dealing with such uncertainty had stayed with him over the past few days. Knowing that his sister was recovering made everything they had done feel even more worthwhile. Captain Roberts also mentioned something else. Thompson continued. Williams specifically asked him to find a way to thank you and Rex. He said that Rex's comfort and your decision to treat the situation as a welfare check instead of a security threat probably prevented him from having a complete breakdown. James reached down to pat Rex, who responded by placing his head on James's knee in that familiar gesture of connection. Rex deserves all the credit. He saw what I couldn't see at first, that Williams needed help, not investigation. The tablet chimed with a notification, and Thompson looked at the screen. Speak of the devil, she said with a grin. Captain Roberts is here to see you. Should I send him up? A few minutes later, Captain Roberts entered the office, but he wasn't alone. Behind him walked Williams, looking much healthier and more relaxed than he had 3 days earlier. His civilian clothes and genuine smile were a stark contrast to the anguished young soldier James had met at the palace. Rex immediately stood and walked over to Williams, his tail wagging with what appeared to be recognition and happiness. Williams knelt down and embraced the dog, and James could see tears in his eyes, but these were tears of gratitude rather than despair. Officer Mitchell, Williams said, standing to shake James's hand. I wanted to thank you in person. What you and Rex did for me, I don't have adequate words. How is your sister doing? James asked, genuinely concerned about the family situation that had started everything. Williams's face lit up with joy. She's going to be fine. Complete recovery expected. The doctors said she was incredibly lucky. When I think about how close I came to not being there for her because I was trying to stick to duty protocol. You were doing what you thought was right, James replied. Your dedication to duty is admirable, even if the circumstances required a different response. Captain Roberts stepped forward. Officer Mitchell, I wanted to personally thank you for your handling of the situation. Your decision to trust your instincts and your partner's assessment prevented what could have been a much more serious incident. What do you mean? James asked, curious about the captain's perspective on events. Williams later told us that he was considering leaving his post to go to the hospital, regardless of protocol, Roberts explained. If he had done that without permission, it could have resulted in serious disciplinary action, possibly ending his military career. Your intervention gave us the opportunity to handle it properly and ensure he got the support he needed. Williams nodded in agreement. I was at my breaking point. Another hour or two, and I probably would have just walked away from my post. That would have destroyed my career and dishonored my regiment. But because of how you handled everything, I was able to get to my sister while maintaining my military standing. James felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that their compassionate response had prevented Williams from making a decision that could have had long-term negative consequences for his life and career. Rex seemed to understand that this was a reunion and celebration, and he continued to stay close to Williams, occasionally looking up at him with those intelligent, caring eyes that had first recognized his distress. There's something else, Williams said, reaching into a bag he had brought with him. My sister wanted to do something to thank Rex specifically. She's a veterinary student, and when she heard about how Rex recognized my emotional state and provided comfort, she was amazed by his emotional intelligence. Williams pulled out a custom-made collar with Rex's name embroidered on it, along with a small medal that read, Hero of Compassion. The craftsmanship was beautiful, clearly made with care and attention to detail. She made this while she was recovering in the hospital, Williams explained. She said that Rex represents everything that's good about the bond between humans and animals, and she wanted him to have something special. James was moved by the gesture, and by the thought that Williams's sister had spent time during her own recovery creating something to honor Rex. It spoke to the kind of people they were and explained why Williams had been so devoted to his family. As James fitted the new collar on Rex, the dog seemed to understand that it was a special recognition. He sat proudly, his chest out, looking every bit the hero he had proven himself to be. Officer Mitchell, Captain Roberts said formally, I also wanted to let you know that your actions have been noted by our command structure. The way you handled this situation has become a case study in community policing and crisis intervention. We're hoping to use this as an example for training purposes if you're agreeable. James was honored by the suggestion and agreed immediately. If Williams' story could help train other officers to recognize when compassion was more appropriate than enforcement, then something positive would continue to come from this experience. The visit concluded with handshakes, more expressions of gratitude, and promises to stay in touch. As Williams and Captain Roberts prepared to leave, Williams knelt down one more time to say goodbye to Rex. "Take care of your partner," he told the dog seriously. "He's one of the good ones." Rex's tail wagged in response, and James felt proud of both his partner's emotional intelligence and the positive outcome they had achieved together. 6 months after the incident at Buckingham Palace, James received an unexpected phone call at the police station. The voice on the other end was familiar but much stronger and more confident than he remembered. "Officer Mitchell, this is Guard Williams. I hope you remember me." "Of course I remember you," James replied warmly. "How are you and your sister doing?" "That's actually why I'm calling. We're both doing wonderfully, and we wanted to invite you and Rex to something special. Would you be available next Saturday for a small ceremony at the palace?" James was intrigued but puzzled. "What kind of ceremony?" "It's better if it's a surprise, but I promise it's something positive." "Can you make it?" James checked his schedule and confirmed that he would be available. He spent the rest of the week wondering what Williams could have planned that would require a ceremony at the palace. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear, reminiscent of that foggy day 6 months earlier, when everything had begun. James and Rex arrived at the palace gates, where they were met by Captain Roberts and escorted to a courtyard behind the main building. What James saw took his breath away. There were approximately 50 people gathered in a semicircle, including several royal guards in full dress uniform, palace officials, and what appeared to be media representatives. At the center of the gathering was a small podium decorated with flowers and official banners. Williams approached them, wearing his dress uniform and looking every inch the proud soldier. Beside him was a young woman on crutches who bore a strong family resemblance, clearly his sister, fully recovered from her accident. "Officer Mitchell, Rex," Williams said formally. "I'd like you to meet my sister, Sarah. Sarah, this is the police officer and his partner who saved my sanity 6 months ago." Sarah leaned down carefully to pet Rex, who responded with gentle enthusiasm. "I've heard so much about both of you," she said with a warm smile. "What you did for my brother and for our family means more than you could ever know." Captain Roberts stepped forward and addressed the gathered crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today to recognize an exceptional example of community policing and compassionate service. 6 months ago, Officer Mitchell and his K-9 partner Rex responded to what appeared to be a security concern but turned out to be something entirely different. James began to understand what was happening and felt both honored and slightly embarrassed by the formal recognition. Rex seemed to sense the importance of the occasion and sat at attention beside him. Instead of following standard security protocols, Roberts continued, Officer Mitchell chose to trust his partner's assessment that Guard Williams needed help rather than investigation. That decision prevented a personal crisis from becoming a professional disaster and demonstrated the best of what police work can be. A palace official stepped forward carrying an ornate wooden box. "Officer Mitchell, by order of Her Majesty's government and in recognition of your exceptional service to the community, you are hereby awarded the Police Commendation for Distinguished Service." James was stunned. He had never expected his actions that day to result in formal recognition, especially at such a high level. As he accepted the commendation, he felt overwhelmed by the honor and by the presence of so many people who had come to witness it. "And for Rex," the official continued, opening another box, "we have a special recognition created specifically for exceptional service animals. This medal has only been awarded 3 times in the past 50 years. The medal was beautiful, crafted specifically for Rex's collar, with an inscription that read, 'For exceptional service in recognition of human need.'" As James attached it to Rex's collar, the dog seemed to understand the solemnity of the moment and remained perfectly still. Williams stepped up to the podium to address the gathering. 6 months ago, I was in the darkest moment of my life. My sister was fighting for her life in a hospital, and I was trying to do my duty while my heart was breaking. I thought I had to choose between my family and my service to my country." The crowd listened intently as Williams continued. Officer Mitchell and Rex showed me that sometimes the most important duty is recognizing when someone needs help. They could have treated me as a security threat, but instead, they saw me as a human being in crisis. That compassion changed everything for me and my family. Sarah Williams stepped forward, still using her crutches but moving confidently. I wanted to be here today because I know that if my brother had tried to handle his crisis alone, it could have destroyed his career and his spirit. The kindness shown by Officer Mitchell and the intuition of Rex literally changed the course of our lives. James felt emotional as he listened to the siblings speak about the impact of that day. At the time, he had simply been trying to do the right thing. But hearing how it had affected their lives gave him a deeper understanding of the importance of choosing compassion over protocol when the situation called for it. Rex seemed to understand that he was being honored and maintained his dignified posture throughout the ceremony. Several of the other K-9 officers present commented on his exceptional behavior and obvious intelligence. After the formal presentations, the gathering moved to a reception where James had the opportunity to speak with many of the attendees. He learned that the story of Williams and Rex had been used in training programs for both police and military personnel as an example of effective crisis intervention. One of the palace officials approached James during the reception. "Officer Mitchell, your actions 6 months ago have had impacts far beyond what you might realize. The way you handled Guard Williams' crisis has become a model for how institutions should respond when their people are struggling with personal issues." "I just did what seemed right at the time," James replied modestly. "Rex deserves most of the credit. He's the one who recognized that Williams needed help." "That's exactly why this recognition is so important," the official continued. "You demonstrate that doing what seems right, when combined with experience and good judgment, often leads to the best outcomes." Williams approached them with his sister in tow. "Officer Mitchell, I have one more thing to share with you." The story of what happened has inspired Sarah to change her focus in veterinary school. She's now specializing in therapy animal training, specifically working with dogs who can provide emotional support for people in crisis. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "Seeing what Rex was able to do for my brother made me realize there's a whole field of work involving animals, helping humans through difficult times. I want to train dogs to do what Rex did naturally, recognize when people need emotional support." James was amazed by the ripple effects of that single morning 6 months earlier. Not only had they helped Williams through his crisis, but his sister had been inspired to dedicate her career to expanding that kind of help to others. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Williams and his sister spent a few final minutes with James and Rex. The bond between Rex and Williams was still evident, and the dog clearly remembered their first meeting with fondness rather than stress. "Officer Mitchell," Williams said seriously, "I want you to know that I've requested a transfer to a position where I can work with military personnel who are dealing with family crises. I want to help prevent other soldiers from going through what I experienced without support." James shook Williams's hand firmly, deeply impressed by how the young man had transformed his personal crisis into motivation to help others facing similar challenges. As James and Rex prepared to leave the palace, Rex wore his new medal proudly, and James carried his commendation with a sense of deep satisfaction. They had been recognized not just for doing their jobs, but for doing them with compassion and wisdom, and for trusting in the bond between partners that had guided them to the right response. 2 years had passed since that memorable morning at Buckingham Palace, and the story of Officer Mitchell, Rex, and Guard Williams had become something of a legend within both the police force and the military. James often received requests to speak at training seminars about crisis intervention and the importance of reading situations beyond their surface appearance. On this particular autumn morning, James was conducting a routine patrol when his radio crackled with a familiar type of call. "Unit 47, we have reports of suspicious behavior near Westminster Bridge. Possible individual in distress. Please respond." As James and Rex headed toward the location, James couldn't help but think about how his approach to such calls had evolved since the Williams incident. He had learned to look for signs of emotional distress rather than just potential threats, and Rex had become even more attuned to reading human emotional states. When they arrived at Westminster Bridge, James saw a young woman in business attire standing near the railing, staring out at the Thames. Her posture and the way she was gripping the railing immediately reminded him of William's emotional state 2 years earlier. Though the circumstances were completely different, Rex's response was immediate and telling. Instead of showing alertness for a potential threat, he moved toward the woman with the same gentle, compassionate approach he had used with Williams. The dog's emotional radar was functioning perfectly, identifying someone who needed help rather than investigation. James approached carefully, remembering the lessons he had learned about balancing official duty with human compassion. "Miss, I'm Officer Mitchell with the Metropolitan Police. Are you all right?" The woman turned toward him, and James could see that she had been crying. She appeared to be in her late 20s, professionally dressed but clearly struggling with some overwhelming emotional burden. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but her voice betrayed the lie. "Just getting some air before work." Rex positioned himself near the woman, not intrusively, but close enough that his calming presence was available if she needed it. James had learned to trust Rex's judgment completely when it came to assessing people's emotional needs. "Would you mind if we stayed here with you for a few minutes?" James asked gently. "No official business, just making sure everyone's having a good morning." The woman looked down at Rex, who was sitting quietly beside her, and something in her expression softened. "He's beautiful. Very calm. Rex has a special gift for recognizing when people need a friend," James said, deliberately keeping his tone conversational rather than official. "He's helped a lot of people over the years." For the next several minutes, James and the woman talked quietly, while Rex maintained his gentle vigil. Gradually, she opened up about losing her job the previous day, facing eviction from her apartment, and feeling completely overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her control. James listened with the patience and compassion he had developed since the Williams incident, offering practical suggestions about support services and resources, while Rex provided silent emotional support simply through his presence. "You know," James said thoughtfully, "a couple of years ago, Rex and I met a young soldier who was going through one of the worst days of his life. He felt like he had to handle everything alone, but it turned out that accepting help was actually the strongest thing he could do." The woman was interested in the story, and James shared an abbreviated version of their encounter with Williams, emphasizing how reaching out for support had ultimately led to positive changes, not just for Williams, but for many other people as well. "What happened to him?" she asked, clearly finding hope in the idea that someone else had faced crisis and survived it. "He's doing very well now," James replied. He turned his experience into a way to help other military personnel who face similar crises. And his sister, who was injured in the accident that started everything, became a veterinary therapist who trains dogs to help people in emotional distress. As if on cue, Rex moved closer to the woman and gently rested his head against her hand. The gesture was so naturally comforting that she smiled for the first time since James had arrived. "It's funny," she said, scratching behind Rex's ears. "I came here this morning feeling like I was completely alone. But now I feel like maybe there are people who care about strangers." James spent another few minutes connecting the woman with appropriate support services and ensuring she had resources for dealing with her immediate practical problems. By the time they prepared to leave, her emotional state had noticeably improved, and she had a plan for addressing her situation constructively. As James and Rex walked back to their patrol car, James reflected on how the Williams incident had changed, not just his approach to police work, but his entire understanding of what it meant to serve and protect. He had learned that sometimes the most important threats to public safety were the personal crises that isolated people from their communities and support systems. That afternoon, James received a phone call that brought the story full circle. It was Williams, now working in a military family support role, calling with news that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. "Officer Mitchell," Williams said, his voice full of excitement, "I wanted to let you know that Sarah has just opened her own therapy dog training center. She's already working with 3 police departments and 2 military bases to train dogs, specifically for crisis intervention work." James was thrilled to hear about Sarah's success and the expansion of the kind of work that Rex had pioneered through pure instinct. "That's wonderful news. Rex would be proud to know he's inspired a whole new generation of therapy dogs." "There's more," Williams continued. "Sarah wants to invite you and Rex to the grand opening ceremony next month. She's planning to recognize Rex as the inspiration for her entire program." James accepted the invitation gladly, knowing that Rex would enjoy seeing the Williams siblings again and understanding his role in inspiring such important work. A month later, at the opening ceremony for Sarah's Therapy Dog Training Center, James stood with Rex as Sarah addressed a crowd of police officers, military personnel, and therapy dog handlers. The center was beautiful, designed specifically for training dogs to recognize and respond to human emotional distress. 2 years ago, Sarah said to the gathered audience, a police dog named Rex demonstrated something remarkable. Without any special training in therapy work, he recognized that my brother needed emotional support rather than investigation. That single act of intuitive compassion inspired everything you see here today. Rex wore his medal from the palace ceremony and seemed to understand that he was being honored again. Several of the dogs in training at the center had been brought to the ceremony, and Rex interacted with them like a proud mentor introducing newcomers to important work. Williams approached James during the reception following the ceremony. "Officer Mitchell, I want you to know that Rex's example has literally changed how crisis intervention is taught in multiple agencies. The Rex protocol is now part of standard training for both police and military personnel." James was amazed to learn that his partner's intuitive response had become formalized into training protocols. Rex had not only helped one person in crisis, but had potentially influenced how thousands of future crisis situations would be handled. As the ceremony concluded, James realized that the story that had begun with a foggy morning at Buckingham Palace had evolved into something much larger than any of them could have imagined. A single act of compassion, guided by a dog's intuitive understanding of human need, had created ripples that were still expanding and would continue to help people for years to come. Rex, now a bit grayer around the muzzle but still alert and compassionate, had become more than just a police dog. He had become a symbol of the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to recognize when people needed help rather than suspicion. As James and Rex drove home that evening, James reflected on how a career in law enforcement had taught him that the most important moments often came not from dramatic arrests or high-profile cases, but from quiet acts of compassion that recognized the humanity in everyone they encountered. Rex had been his teacher in this lesson, and together they had helped create a legacy that would continue to make a difference long after their own service days were over.